For example, there's my former professor when I was at Carnegie Mellon University, Peter Stearns. You'll be reading more than once in this course, who writes about, why study history, why be a historian, that kind of thing. He writes about other things. He's firmly in the camp of those who believes in cold, dispassionate kind of an objective history, that you can, in fact, be an objective historian. When in point of fact, his strong biases come throughout most of what he writes. He writes from a very white male Eurocentric perspective, and I'm saying that to acknowledge the fact that, surprise, I'm a black guy. I mean, for those of you who are not colorblind, can see that I'm clearly not white, right? So being a black male, from your perspective, automatically biases me, according to most of the research, by the way. Just throwing that in there. But the fact of the matter is, that's because you believe that you can be objective is different than actually being objective. And for anybody to really believe that all of us are sort of cold, dispassionate, and objective is kind of ridiculous. We're human beings. We have imperfections. We have flaws. And as a result, and none of what we do, no matter how expertly we do it, no matter how well researched we are, no matter how well we write about or talk about or give speeches about or do video recordings like the one I'm doing now about history, there are some biases there, whether it's racial bias, or whether it's gender bias, or whether it's heterosexism or homophobia, whether it's transphobia, whether it's misogyny, whether it's class bias, whether we grew up with a silver spoon in our mouths, or relative to that, or whether even for that matter we have educational bias because we have certain advantages. You guys, the guys all of you who are taking this course are working, I'm assuming, toward a bachelor's degree. And that gives you an advantage, quite frankly, over people who are not. And there are more people in this world, and certainly in this country, who are not working on bachelor's degrees than those who are. So you have an advantage, and that might, in fact, give you a bias, right? And so those of us who are on the side of understanding that human beings are the ones who help frame, develop, not necessarily create history. We're not creating history. We're producing. We're producers of history in terms of interpretation and knowledge, but we are not creating it whole cloth, right? That's sort of my argument here. Those of you who understand that kind of argument also understand that we might use a different standard for besides objectivity. My standard happens to be fairness, integrity, and truthfulness. Fairness in the sense that you want to be fair to everybody, including yourself. You acknowledge your own biases, but you also acknowledge that in acknowledging them, sometimes you even talk about them. Sometimes you say, hey, I have a bias towards X or a bias towards Y, even when you're covering X and Y. And so therefore, you're allowing people to be skeptical about some of what you're saying as a result. That what you are saying is not entirely based on everything else that every other researcher has done, right? You sometimes even have to put aside your bias in order to be fair to other people, fair to that history, fair to do a good interpretation. And then, by the way, by being fair, you are maintaining some standard of integrity, right? You're not lying about a particular group of people or saying that a particular group of people are a bunch of cultural degenerates because you don't like that group of people, right? So your bias isn't as involved. You're using evidence to support the fact they're full humanity, flaws and all, warts and all, achievements and all, right? That kind of thing. And then the third thing is truthfulness. And that combines with integrity and fairness, meaning that you do not obfuscate the data, you don't lie on a particular group of people, you don't make an incident involving X into something that doesn't involve X, or something that involves Y instead, in order to make another group of people, or make yourself, or make a particular event look better than what it really is, right? That's not none of that is objectivity. None of that's neutral. None of that's cold and dispassionate. It just means you're doing the best you can with the evidence that you have, and coming to a proper expert level interpretation. So that's sort of where I stand on those things. And that leads to the third thing that I wanted to talk about, which is the whole issue of understanding how best to approach, the beginnings of how to understand how to approach history fairly, truthfully, with a sort of level of integrity that involves, excuse me, not only understand what history is and isn't, and not only understanding that we can't always be, that objectivity is sort of a unicorn, right? It's a unicorn in our profession. But also understanding that in the readings in particular that you're looking at, whether it's Spiegel talking about talking about semiotics, or whether it's Stern's talking about the history profession and why study history and all these sorts of things, where it's Davis talking about decolonization and global history, and how we need to approach history a little bit differently. Is also to sort of understand the necessity as historians to at least begin to ask the right questions, right? And by asking the right questions, it doesn't mean being cynical, right? It's not about cynicism. You don't, there's a difference between being skeptical, which is the proper perspective of any historian to have, and being cynical about history, right? A cynical view of history, let's just pick a history, any number of histories you could pick from. A cynical view of, say, the let's just pick the Great Depression, for instance. This is right off the top of my head. So let's take a look at the history of the Great Depression. A cynical point of view is people went around spending money they didn't have, and they all ended up broke, and they got what they deserved. They died. Divorce rates went up. Abandonment rates, fathers abandoning their families, husbands abandoning their wives rates went up, suicide rates went up, crime rates went up, homelessness rates went up, and so on and so forth. It's all their fault. All these individuals made bad decisions. Well, gee, when 15 million individuals make bad decisions, is it really just on all 15 million individuals, or was there a system in place that actually put these individuals in a position where they had limited choices, and they ended up making bad choices out of the limited group of choices that they had, right? In other words, credit in the United States in the 1920s leading to the Great Depression in the 1930s. It's just one factor, but it is a factor. Just as a for instance. Well, a cynical point of view would just blame all the individuals. And not only is that cynical, it's downright classist, right? And in point of fact, there are historians who did exactly that. Historians at the time in the 1930s did that. Historians in the 40s and 50s. A more nuanced view comes through in the 60s and 70s. Sometimes the best way to be a historian in terms of skepticism versus cynicism is to accept things as both and rather than either or. Most people are binary. It's either right or it's wrong. It's yes or it's no. No one wants to deal with nuance. And people talk about nuance like me, are obviously something's wrong. How dare you talk about nuance, right? Well, the reality is human beings are a little bit more complicated than that, and so are the systems that we create. So it can be both. Individuals made bad decisions, and the economy the consumer economy that grew out of the 1920s was one that basically presented the new middle class and this large struggling working class of Americans with limited choices. And those limited choices were in fact credit-based choices, which led to the Great Depression, or at least one of the things that led to the Great Depression in the United States in the 1930s, right? So it's both. Right? Individuals can make bad decisions and be in a system that limits their decisions at the same time. Hello, right? And that's the difference between skepticism and cynicism. That means that you can approach everything that you read with not with a healthy skepticism. Don't just eject everything out of hand. That's cynical and it's contrarian and it's unhealthy. But at the same time, don't accept everything just because it fits or reflects your point of view either. That that that's not skepticism. That's basically being extremely selective. You decided that the only thing that you want to read are the stuff that you agree with and stuff that you're comfortable with. How are you going to learn anything? Why are you even in this course if that's what you expect to do? In order to do well as as a history student, as a historian, you do have to have a bit of skepticism about things and self-criticism. That means you don't accept everything that you have to say at face value either. In other words, no sacred cows. None. If your faith cannot survive a minor interrogation or an occasional skeptical question, then maybe you don't have enough faith in what you're supposed to believe in. Whether you believe in whether it's spiritual belief or belief in science or belief in nothing. If they can't survive a healthy sense of skepticism and interrogation, then maybe it's not worth believing in for you. Right? I'm just pointing that out, that skepticism is critical in being a good historian and being a really good historian and being a good history student. And so hopefully these themes that I've brought together mesh well and help you in terms of dealing with this course for not only for this week, but for the next 7 weeks. So good luck on the readings. I hope to see you in discussions later on in the week.